Score, the podcast. The only show taking you inside the studios of the world's most celebrated composers and musical storytellers. Presented by Spitfire Audio.
I am Kenny Holmes.
Hey, I'm Robert Kraft, and we have some incredible characters with us, including the magnificent composer Carol today, who just did a blazing rendition of Jai-Ho online, which just thrilled me. And we also are very lucky to have with us all the way from
down the street,
Matt Schrader.
Hey, yeah, it was quite a trip. Quite a trip for me, but I'm so glad that I made it.
This is Score the Podcast, presented by Spitfire Audio, with the longest intro in the history of our series.
I think we're done. We can go right to the show. We've used up all our time. We've got a big show today.
Big show today. Big guest. Another guest joining us from the UK. He's an Emmy and Golden Globe-nominated composer for films like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Yesterday, Motherless Brooklyn, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs? It's like a French film. And he also scored a really interesting episode of Black Mirror called USS Callister. Daniel Pemberton coming on the show.
He's so cool.
We've been wanting to have him on for a long time, too. There's this. I'm telling you, this season has been great because we've had all these guests joining us from the UK.
This season's been so great.
Pemberton is so creative, and every score is so unique, and he really goes outside of the box on everything. So I'm excited to see what he's like. Never met him, and we'll see what's going on in his head coming up later on in the show. And as we mentioned as well, Matt Schrader is joining us. Big day for you, Matt, and the Blockbuster team.
Yes, Blockbuster is out today, the first episode. It's Blockbuster, the story of James Cameron. So we have a 10-part original series, dives into James Cameron's early career and leads into his mid to late career, and lots of James Horner in there too. So it's a really, really fascinating story that we've been working on for like 9 months. So it'll be unveiling, unrolling over the next 10 weeks, and we even have a lot of the bonus interviews. The first season of Blockbuster, I spoke to a lot of people in doing research, but we didn't record it. And this time I recorded it. So I have conversations with people that are like high school buddies, college buddies of Jim Cameron, plus other people that we'll meet later on down the line. Someone that Robert worked with at 20th Century Fox during the Titanic years. So a lot of this story will be familiar to Robert. Bring back maybe some trauma from the panic about Titanic.
I'm still
the Titanic
suffering from
panic.
Post-Titanic stress disorder, PTSD.
Is Robert in the series? Is he like, hey,
not
gents,
directly?
It's me,
if
Robert.
This is the James Horner story, he would be.
Nice.
But Robert's boss is, or was.
Yes, I had
so
several.
He will.
That's good. And that was some incredible time. Matt, I haven't had a chance to ask you, did you have to build like an enormous boat to give this some authenticity?
A replica? Yeah,
yes.
It was a replica.
Did you have to shoot in like a huge outdoor water-filled set?
Yeah, we built a tank, so we recorded it all on a giant tank in Mexico.
Actually, you just needed the sounds of these things. That's all it really was.
He did that in his bathtub.
It was maybe overkill a little bit. We made it look really good, too.
That's great. You know what? Authenticity is key.
We're going to ask Matt a little bit more about Blockbuster and dive into what types of things are covered in the story a little bit. But first, we want to take a moment, as we always do, to thank our sponsor, Spitfire Audio, maker of orchestral virtual instruments for film composers, many of the composers that come here on the show every week.
And Spitfire has 2 new editions of their best-selling BBC, the British Broadcasting Company, BBC Symphony Orchestra, including a Discover edition. It's a whole symphony orchestra at your fingertips, and it's just $49. I don't know what that is in British pounds, but I'm going to say that if you send them quid, exactly
49
right.
quid.
If you send them 49 American, they're going to send you this entire symphony orchestra. And if that's out of your budget, they have an incredible deal where you just fill out a form online on the Spitfire website and you'll get it free in 2 weeks.
We also want to mention Spitfire's new Composer magazine. You can see inside John Paisano's studio with a tour alongside Christian Henson. They even have some really cool detailed photographs all throughout Hans Zimmer's studio, which if you haven't seen inside there, we shot in there for the documentary. It's one of the coolest spaces that you could work in, and it's kind of creepy. There's little skulls and dark. It's dark and red. Hans really drawing some inspiration from a cool space. So a lot to look at. Check out Composer magazine.
And most importantly for our listeners, have we got a deal for you? 20% off your first purchase. It's good on well over 50 different Spitfire libraries. You just use the promo code SCORE2020. That's all one word. And it's a limited time offer, so you got to get in there right away. Use SCORE2020 to elevate your music. And stick around after today's show. We're going to play a cue created using the Oliver Arnold Stratus package. It's super cool.
Nice. All right, let's get to it, Matt. So Blockbuster, it's been a long time coming. I've known a little bit about it. I did a little voice work with you. In January?
You'll hear Kenny in episode 1.
Ooh, that is a reason to
But
tune
I will
in
say
right
I haven't
there.
listened yet. I haven't listened to any of it. You kept it secret from me.
Nobody has.
Last season, you played me. I think you gave me the first 5 episodes before it released to buzz through it, and I was lucky to be able to binge it all at once. But I'm excited to listen as a normal person now.
Yeah, we're still working on the last couple episodes. The music plays a huge part in this. We worked with a composer named Fernando Arroyo Lascarain, who's done some work, some shadow writing for some bigger projects in the past, and also worked with some really big name composers. And he has written like 2.5 hours of music for this whole series. It's, more than you would get in a Star Wars film. And it's amazing. So, obviously the very end of all this stuff is what we're working on now, but it's a much more musical story this time around. And each episode we're really trying to bring the storytelling, through, with the music and allow kind of the sound design that Peter did, who worked on score. That's how we met Peter Bobietz in the first place. So he's kind of overseeing all the sound design of this stuff, and then bringing that all together with the music and how all of those things can kind of cross over, and a lot more. I'm really excited about all of our voice actors we worked with. Ross Marquand from The Walking Dead, and he was in Avengers Endgame too, as Red Skull, and he is our James Cameron. And he was just great because several points throughout the season, I'm sitting across from him as we're recording these things, and I swear it's actually Jim Cameron. He just did such a great job of kind of bringing that on. So we're really excited. We have 70 something roles in this season. So it's a much, much bigger season, 10 episodes. And there's a lot going on, from Terminator to, all the way through, Titanic. And then what comes in Jim's life even after that.
Well, for our listeners who haven't checked out Blockbuster, we started referring it to as a movie for your ears, but can you explain a little bit about the genesis of how this idea came about, and then how you decided to choose James Cameron to do your second season? I know there's so many ideas floating around, and so many people were asking, who's it going to be? Who's it going to be? Why did you choose James Cameron?
Well, the first season that we did came on, I think, because of score. And when we were putting together Score, the documentary, there was this section with John Williams. And we started to I learned a little bit about John Williams' history and working with Steven Spielberg and George Lucas and how they all met, and this interesting friendship between Spielberg and Lucas. So that's what season 1 is about, is that kind of creative, friendship and support that they developed during the invention of the blockbuster, with Jaws and then Star Wars. And this season, we pick up it's a different storyline. It's self-contained, but it picks up right at the end of that one. And the first episode, you'll hear James Cameron going to the movie theater, the Chinese theater in Hollywood, the same one George Lucas sat across from and was eating a burger at that Hamburger Hamlet. And we had that scene in...
Thinking his career was over.
Yes. And the same Memorial Day weekend. And Jim Cameron and his buddies go and watch Star Wars there. And Jim comes out. He's 22 years old. He's a truck driver. He's making $4 an hour and completely unfulfilled. And he says, "Jeez, we gotta get it together. We gotta go make a film now because everything's gonna pass us by unless we go try to do this now." So he and his buddies, of which Kenny plays one of them, Bill Wisher, and they go and shoot a short film and then say, "All right, this is going to be our calling card. We'll try to flip this into making, a real movie after this." And a lot of things go wrong in that process, and Jim really has to figure his way out and ends up landing a gig with Roger Corman, the famous producer who did all kinds of really, really low budget B movies that were kind of in the sci-fi realm. So Jim ends up working at a place that was known for knocking off Star Wars and other films like that were big hits.
Hey, Matt, that sounds amazing. I mean, I can't wait to hear some of the inside stories of a couple things that I certainly worked on, but I didn't get deep into the drama of what was going on. I know there was always drama, particularly with two very powerful creative geniuses, Jim Cameron and James Horner.
Yep.
And so I'm eager to hear that.
James Horner won't make an appearance until next week's episode that comes out. You'll hear him in the next episode, as will a few other people, including Bill Paxton.
Who nice.
Is the same situation. Jim hired him at Roger Corman's studio and to be a painter. And Bill Paxton ends up being, this one of the great actors over the next couple decades and starring in several of Jim's films, and then many, many more after that too. So it's a really interesting story of a different type of film pioneer, but someone that obviously has this trajectory where he's James Cameron is looking for greatness in everything that he does, and fails many times. And eventually has this enormous opportunity with Titanic. So we're tracing all of those journeys and the struggles along the way.
Did you know James Cameron was going to be the pick right away, or how long did it take you to realize that we're doing season 2 on Jim Cameron?
It took a little bit of figuring out because I think there's a few other. I mean, it's really interesting what Spielberg and Lucas do next with the whole Indiana Jones series. That is something that I think is really interesting too. But no, I mean, I thought that the fact that Jim Cameron's entire journey as a filmmaker literally starts with seeing Star Wars, and that's what it gives him. The initial push to say, I got to go make a movie. Otherwise, I'm going to miss my opportunity to even be in this industry. And he does that as he's walking out the doors of the Chinese theater and talking to his friends on the sidewalk. And it's such a perfect place for this next great filmmaker's journey to begin. So it was too perfect to
you know
pass
what
up.
I love about Blockbuster, and even just similar to what we learn on this show, is it opens up the eyes and ears for people that working in the film industry isn't rich people and everything is perfect and everything is great. Like, you really get a sense of the struggles and the hard work that goes into it. And it really opened my eyes just listening to Blockbuster. I mean, you knew some of those stories in the first season, but hearing what John Williams went through with his wife passing away and sort of moving on to that next step, just understanding the human stories involved with a lot of these great pieces of art that we all know and love, but we don't know what went into them. And I think it's just really cool that you use this platform to tell these stories in a really immersive way. And we have a trailer here that Matt has provided us, so you can get a little glimpse of Blockbuster Season 2, the story of James Cameron. Check it out.
Blockbuster, the winner of Adweek's Creative Podcast of the Year, returns.
Film is a hobby, not a career.
I know, Dad.
James Cameron.
A movie for your ears.
James Cameron. What, me? No.
This isn't what I envisioned.
It's a bad idea, okay?
About the world's most ambitious filmmaker.
It has to be perfect.
Just say, I'm the king of the world.
What? Why would I yell that?
Blockbuster. Get it wherever you get your podcasts. Yeah, so as you can tell, I'm pretty excited about this whole season. It's been a lot of work, but we hope that you enjoy episode 1, and we'll have it for the next 9 episodes after that. A whole season, a lot more than we did last year, and it's really, really immersive. So I'm excited for you to hear some of those experiences that are part of the most famous movies of all time, most famous experiences of all time, and that shaped, arguably, the most visionary director that continues to invent these crazy ideas for things. You even see that now with him shooting 4 different Avatar movies at once. So it's someone that totally thinks outside the box and puts everything into what he's trying to make. So it's a really powerful thing. I think everyone involved in this, we were able to take our time and make it right.
Robert, do you have a good Jim Cameron story? You guys spent some time together.
It was interesting, Matt, when you were talking about Jim and thinking outside the box and how creative he is. Titanic and Avatar were both unbelievable experiences to work on. I can't deny that. I was lucky to be at Fox when we were doing both those pictures, and the music for both of them was a career in itself, getting that done. When we got to the scoring portion of Titanic, getting to that moment was a challenge because Titanic was so hard to make. But it turns out Jim was so deep into editing, we were trying to make a release date. And so we were with James Horner in the recording studio at Todd AO, which is no longer a place that's used for recording scores. And Jim, I guess the night before we were about to start recording, said, I cannot edit the film to make our release date and attend the orchestra sessions. So what I'm going to do is set up a system in my house tonight so that James, when you are conducting and recording the orchestra, I can watch while I'm editing. I'll set up a monitor in my editing room in Malibu, and the entire 2 weeks of recording that score, Jim sat in this kind of awesome throne room chair. It was a big chair with a microphone kind of coming around to the front of the chair, and watched a lot of the sessions. And so there was a monitor in the studio with Jim Cameron over the console watching us record, and it was just
the Wizard
a little bit
of Jim.
Yeah, right. Kind of God's in the house. And of course, he was editing a lot of the time. So that chair that was very well lit, I always remember, was empty sometimes during a cue. And we'd have to say to this empty chair, hello, you there? Jim, did you hear that? And you'd hear from off screen, yeah, man, I heard it. I liked it. Or I heard it. Can you go again? I want it to be a little more such and such. But we basically recorded for the approval of this chair on a little monitor. And
had anyone ever done that before?
It was really the first time I'd done something that became very routine, which is directors not available to attend the scoring session because they're in post. And so to answer your question, I don't think so. I was very accustomed to the director being in the room for every note because that's what they do. But as movies became more and more post-production intensive, directors would say, man, I'm at the FX studio all day today. You guys do the score. Plus, it accompanied demos for scores had gotten so sophisticated that in some ways they'd heard the score already.
Yeah. Well, and now we're doing everything by video
I was going to say, Jim Cameron,
another way,
25 years ahead
entertainment
of the game here. It took us a while to set up our podcast. He did it in the 90s across
right
thousands of miles. That's crazy. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to Blockbuster Season 2. And if you haven't listened to Blockbuster Season 1 yet, what are you doing with your life? Go check it out. The first episode's out now. But don't listen yet. We have a great show coming up as well with Daniel Pemberton coming up. We do want to tell you real quick, though, there's been a lot of movement with some of the big films that were expected
Speaking
this year.
Of blockbusters.
Some of which are shifting around to 2021. Some are switching dates around in weird ways. Here's just a couple of the headlining films. Tenet has moved to July 31st, which pushed back 2 weeks. It was originally, I think, was it supposed to come out in July?
July 17th.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Yep. So that one pushed back 2 weeks. Top Gun Maverick is coming out around Christmas, and it was supposed to be out June 24th. Wonder Woman 1984 is now listed as October 2nd. It's moved a couple of times. This is interesting. Godzilla versus Kong moved to May 2021. May 2021. It was originally supposed to come out on November 20th. And with that, the new 007 film, No Time to Die, moved up 5 days. So you're going to be able to see that one 5 days earlier now. They took the November 20th spot.
What a mess all of this is.
And Matrix 4 moved to April 2022, so back almost a year.
Yeah.
I don't even know what to make of these dates. I kind of just am not taking them to the bank because they're so uncertain, but it seems just a mess. I mean, they don't know. No one knows what to expect.
The big one is Tenet. Are they? I asked Robert as soon as we heard about them shifting 2 weeks. Is that enough? Are they planning on 2 weeks being enough for people to come back to theaters or whatever they need to do? And maybe it's a creative thing. They're finishing up the last bit of something, and this is an opportunity to make something right in the film. We don't really know. Everything's so secretive, but
we don't know.
But that's going to be a huge movie whenever it comes out.
Yeah,
and I could definitely see them wanting to be at the very start of, people starting to come back to the theaters, and then boom, here's this massive movie that people
it'll be a
for.
historical moment if they do it and it works out, because this will go down as, remember when everything shut down and then Tenet came out and saved movie theaters by coming out and proving that it works.
Yeah, I think you're right.
It will also be a historical moment, and needless to say, I wouldn't wish this for anybody, including that movie with a filmmaker and a composer, both of whom I love and wish only success, and a lead actor. Really excited about Tenet. But it would be historic as well if it comes out July 31st. And as my mother used to say, Smarty had a party and nobody came. So if it doesn't pay off,
I'm going to steal that.
If it was
for the next season of Blockbuster,
if it was silent in
the story of Smarty,
he had a party.
It's a good movie idea. So if it's,
but there's no way to prove anything.
That's going to be historic too, and that's going to send a real chill through the film business if Tenet opens and it's underwhelming. So, but we'll see.
There's definitely a gamble.
Well, and did you see what they did too? They moved it back 2 weeks, but I think they're doing like a test run at theaters with Inception, which is interesting.
Yes.
So they're basically giving themselves 2 weeks to see if people are actually going to show up. And it happens to be, what is it, the 10-year anniversary of Inception on that already?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I don't know whether it was a high-level person or an intern or who noticed that could work out as a cool idea, but it's pretty smart to say, why don't we let's test the waters here and see if anybody shows up.
And I think before we go to our show, I can tell you that whether it was a high-level person or an intern, I guarantee you as the sands of time stream through the hourglass, the boss will say, it was my idea. That's one thing I learned in show business. When in doubt, give it to the boss. But we'll see. A couple weeks coming up. And
would you go, Robert? Would you go to the movies right now? I know they're fluctuating with like capacities and all the different things. So it's interesting. It's an interesting question to ask everybody.
Ask me on the night of July 30th before the 31st. I'll tell you that I really want to see Tenet. Super interested to see it. So it's
if there's
6
any movie
weeks
that
away.
might have the ability to bring people out, it's going to be that one. A lot of there's are sequels that are highly anticipated, but it's the Christopher Nolan magic. I think James Cameron, if he had something coming out, he could maybe be on equal footing there, but yeah, it's all about that big spectacle story.
I just had an idea that we are going to pursue with great vigor. We are going to have a Score the Podcast screening of Tenet, where we buy out, come on, work with me here. We're going to buy out a room in a multiplex. We're going to count the seats and divide by 6. How am I doing so far? And we're going to have a contest on who gets I don't know, how many seats could we get in there? Maybe 12 viewers or 15 viewers all sitting 4 or 5 seats apart. And Kenny, Matt, and Carol, you will pay for it, and I will make the introductory remarks where I stand in front like they do in those theaters and say, we hope you're all comfortable. I'm glad to come to the show. That will be my contribution. You guys go and buy all the tickets out for like a midnight showing, Score the Podcast. Who's in? Who wants to write a letter right now?
Sounds like 5 pounds of cheese.
It could be 5 pounds of cheese, but it'd be kind of cool. Maybe we'll just go with
the better idea. Let's do an official Score the Podcast screening of Inception at your own house, and you can stream it on your couch, and I'm sure it's on Netflix or something.
And on that note, don't we have an amazing show coming up? Should we talk about
this is a great one, guys. Yeah.
Our composer?
Yeah, Daniel Pemberton. He blew me away with the Into the Spider-Verse score last year. That thing was amazing. Yeah. And then he follows it up with Motherless Brooklyn and Yesterday, which are as you mentioned, Robert, like you wouldn't know these are the same composer working on these films. He's got such range.
Oh. No. Is that my mailbox?
We have something in the mailbox.
There's like smoke coming out of the mailbox, a little explosion in there. What happened? What'd we get?
We have a message in from Fenton Huston. Doesn't say where Fenton is from. He says, absolutely love the show. We're coming up on 5 years since the tragic death of James Horner, who we were just talking about. He had a very distinct musical style that influenced me a lot, both as a film enthusiast and composer. And his question, do any of you have a personal memory of him and his music that you would care to share? Or did a score ever have a significant impact on you? Robert, I think this is a good question for you.
Man, so many memories of working with James. He was unique. I'll tell you, the first thing that comes to mind was a request that he made when we were doing Avatar. James usually composed at his home. And he had a small studio in his home, and that's where he did a lot of the work. But for Avatar, we actually looked at the budget, and he said what he wanted to do was carve out a small portion of the budget. I thought it was a unique idea to rent a space that was completely separate from his house. He didn't care really much about what the space was. He wanted it near his home, and he wanted to make a very dedicated Avatar synth room with a lot of synths and samplers and room for some computers with libraries of sounds and odd sounds, because he wanted a very dedicated space to invent a score that was unique to the world of Avatar. And, usually in a budget you have sort of rentals and orchestra fees and all that. I don't remember ever putting on, a separate rental for a house. And that's what we ended up finding, a house near his house that was for rent for a couple months. We just put him in there, and he went every day. He didn't want it to be a permanent place. He just wanted a kind of separate rental place to write the Avatar score, which arguably one of my favorite scores. So it worked out. It was just a nice moment where he came to me and said, this is going to sound odd, but I want to rent a separate place to set up purely for Avatar and then break it down afterwards.
And you made it happen. And we really
I not only made it happen, I got a hammer, some nails, plywood, and started to build.
That is heroic.
It was.
You're a craftsman.
I am a craftsman. Thank you. I got my craftsman tools.
Thanks for the question, Fenton. If you have a question for the show, send it over. Score the mailbox at epicleff.com, EPICLEFF.com. We'll try to get to your questions, and maybe you will make an appearance right here on the show.
Wow,
we're going to take a quick break. Matt, thanks so much for joining us in the
Matt Schrader
block of the show today. Go check out Blockbuster. During the break here, we're going to play you the full trailer of Blockbuster Season 2, the story of James Cameron. And coming up after the break, we're joined by Daniel Pemberton. Stick around. We'll be right back.
James Cameron, you have been targeted for termination.
What? Me? No. Oh no! Are you kidding me? That was a dream. Oh, that was a dream.
The winner of Adweek's Creative Podcast of the Year returns.
I'm just saying, Jim, why don't you go back to college? Get your degree.
I don't think that's what I'm supposed to be doing.
Blockbuster, the story of James Cameron.
This just isn't what I envisioned.
That's a bad idea, okay?
You are fired, Jim.
I'm fired.
It's time to look for another career.
And the pressure to prove himself.
Arnold.
This line.
Huh?
It's feminine when I say that I'll be back.
Leveraging everything.
Why would you do this?
This is my profession.
It's my movie. Jim. Hey, Derek, you stay out of this. Help!
What the hell's going on?
To achieve something titanic.
It has to be perfect.
Leo, just say, I'm the king of the world.
What? Why would I yell that?
A new 10-part original series.
Whoa, we're still dropping. Damn it.
I got it, Jim.
Jesus. We're gonna crash. Holy, talk to me.
I got it, Jim.
You don't got it.
I got it.
What do we do?
Blockbuster, the story of James Cameron. Binge Season 1 of Blockbuster now, wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, Score fans, it's Kenny. We are stoked to be back for Season 3, and we couldn't have done it without your support. Be sure to connect with us on social media for the latest guest announcements, video clips, industry news, and more. You can find us on all the social platforms. Twitter is @ScoreThePodcast, Instagram @ScoreMovie, and Facebook @ScoreMovie, or you can just search Score, a film music documentary. Also, please remember to click subscribe on your podcast app, and if you're on Apple Podcasts, leave us a short review. It helps more people discover the show. All right, enough business. Let's get back to it.
Hi, this is Chung Jae-il. You're listening to Score, the podcast, and now let's go back to the show.
Welcome back to Score, the podcast, presented by Spitfire Audio. We are very, very excited for our guest today. Another guest joining us from the UK. This weird time we're in has given us an opportunity to connect with some of our favorite composers across the pond. He is a Golden Globe and Emmy-nominated composer for many, many great films. Last year's Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and yesterday, also Motherless Brooklyn. And Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse 2 is coming soon. We know that. Also King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, Steve Jobs, so many great ones. Daniel Pemberton joining the show today. Daniel, how are you, man?
Yeah, I'm all right. I'm just here working away, still working. Like, doesn't seem that different. I just, stuck in my room working on things over and over again.
I wonder, are you used to having someone else in the room with you? And is this solo venture different? Or are you sort of comfortable enough with tech that you don't need three guys sort of standing by to, can you plug this in deal?
No, I've always just done stuff myself at home. It's just, I find it very hard to write with other people in the room. I actually find it quite good.
So this is kind of normal for you then?
Yeah, it's super normal. This is just like every day, just kind of what I do all the time anyway. Just there's like it's like London's really quiet and chill, so like it's actually quite, you know, guiltily, it's quite, that aspect of it is quite nice for me.
I saw an interview with you where you mentioned the neighborhood in London that you're in, which I wasn't familiar with, but sounds like one of those super hip neighborhoods that has become more gentrified recently. Somebody asked you, is it called Bermondsey?
Bermondsey, yeah. It's become, it's like near London Bridge. It's like, if you know, like London Bridge and Tower Bridge, which is the one that goes up and down, it's in between those. But like, I've lived here for like 20 years, and it's got, like, when I moved here, like, what's interesting about right now is it reminds me of when I first moved here, when it was super quiet and there was no one around. Now there's like zillions of people all the time, but like it's got back to kind of what it was like 20 years ago, which I'm kind of secretly quite enjoying.
So are you able to, have you come up with anything new? We know that you're very experimental and a lot of your scores have a unique original sound that you're sort of, you document a lot of this stuff on your social media, but have you come up with some sort of new interesting sound while you've been staying at home out there?
No, I've got back into trying to program some synths. Like, it's quite a good opportunity to be like, oh, let's try and learn how to program this synth a bit better. But I haven't done anything like particularly, I'm trying to think. I've been recording quite a lot of guitar feedback in here on a shitty.
We saw some amazing videos of you rocking
for Birds
really
of Prey.
hard. Yeah.
So I'm doing a project at the moment that I'm sort of recording a lot of feedback for, which is quite interesting. But I don't think I've been doing anything like, I've been writing basically. I've just been doing a lot of. I'll tell you what I have bought. I bought these. These are really cool. So a friend of mine called Stephen Gallagher posted something, and these are like these tiny Korg clip mics.
Oh my goodness!
That you can attach.
He's holding a little lav mic. What do you?
Well, they're basically for tuning for saxophones and wind instruments. The idea is you clip it onto the horn, and it takes the vibrations and just tells you, you know, whether you're in tune or not. But they double up. If you really crank them up, they double up as insane mics. So I've been sticking them on bits of paper. Well, I don't know if I show you, this is going to fuck everything. Let's just try something. This might go horrible.
Let's do it.
We're ready for everything here.
We're going to sample it and use it in our next theme song.
This might not work. I'm just trying.
I was just wondering if you could take that and clip it onto a singer's larynx and see if they're in tune.
Right, hang on. Right, let's just see. Hang on. But this is not super interesting. Let's see if I got something more interesting. Like, if you
it's funky. It's like a hip hop kick drum.
Like, you can get really good. So yeah, if you got like, this is just on a. So this is not sounding particularly exciting. I got to say, you need to like. You kind of hear it through there. If I crank it up a bit more. You're not really getting it, to be honest. You're just sounding like someone hitting a pole. But when
this is part of what a composer does, though, right?
This is what you do.
You're experimenting.
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah, so you got like. I mean, like, this is not really my finest hour. This is a bit more empty. I might just drink a bit. Hang on.
He's literally making an instrument out of his water bottle he's drinking out of.
The danger of this is that if this is the last thing you ever record. Ooh.
But it's got like a really. It ends up sounding like when you record it. Hang on. So you can sort of pitch it if I move this around a bit, but like. But the thing is, it ends
You've
up
just written a great cue. That's a danger and tension cue.
Yeah, I do quite a lot like that. It's what's interesting about it is it sort of really heavily compresses the sound, so it ends up sounding a bit like really early 60s, almost like kung fu movies. You know, when you get that, and it's like insanely compressed.
Were you always experimenting like this? We wanted to get into a little bit of how you got into film scoring, but I mean, I guess we can start there. What was your early days of music? Were you in music school? Did you grow up with musical parents?
No, I mean, like, I got very into like synthesizer music when I was about 10 or 11 or something, and that'd be people like Jean-Michel Jarre, Vangelis, and The Art of Noise. And I was always very interested in sound and like worlds and atmosphere more than, you know, songs and lyrics really. And I think around 92, 94, there was this like really big electronic music explosion in Britain that had like lots of really cool artists like Future Sound of London, The Orb, Aphex Twin, all these kind of people. And they were using sound in a very interesting way. And that always got me quite excited. Like the idea that music can be anything. It doesn't, I'm not like big on, I don't really like rules. I don't like being told this is the way you do things. I like trying to work out how can we just do something different. And I think through that, I started making music in my bedroom on a 4-track. I'd like saved up loads of money and I bought a Korg wave station and a 4-track tape machine. Didn't even have a sequencer. And then I would just record, like make sort of textural ambient stuff on that. And so I got very into sound from an early age, like just recording stuff. I used to have a really crappy Walkman with a recording function. And then I got a mini disc player, which I think is actually over here, still here. Look, the same one I've had for like.
Behind Daniel is a ton of instruments, and you just. Oh, look at that!
Oh man, that's it. A relic.
He's got his throwback,
straight from the 90s. So I got very into sound and like what sound could bring to something. And then I put this record out when I was 16, which is kind of random, called Bedroom, which is quite a pretty avant-garde electronic record. And then a director, you know, heard that and he asked me to start scoring a TV show he was doing, documentary, which amazingly, if you want an idea of what the time was, this is like 96, I think, or 97. The film was this person called Janet Street Porter, and it was her arguing that the internet was a passing fad that would never catch on, and it was only going to be used by like sad men. And like the whole thing was like basically the sort of 90s equivalent of CB radio, and the whole show was her basically arguing the internet is nothing more than a passing fad. So that really dates the show pretty well.
By the way, that could be a new Netflix hit today. Is that
it's a film. Black Mirror episode?
Yeah, it should be. Oh, speaking of Black Mirror episode, I listened last night I just re-listened to that score that you did. That was it's funny you said 90s kind of techno synthy feel that was really interesting vibe to the music in the episode.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like electronic, from an electronic point of view and like sound experimentation. There was really great stuff going on in the 90s. And it feels like, you know, that was a good time to be absorbing like just the idea of a world of sound. And so that, you know, that had a big impact on me. And, you know, sometimes I'm doing experimentation just because my demo's sounding a bit shit. And I just need to find something to distract you from the fact that demo's not really working. It's like a magician, right? Like a magician says, like, I don't know, you know, like, you know, the magician does something where they go like, look at this hand over here, look at this. And then the other hand, like that comes up, you know,
right.
It's like,
of course.
So I sometimes do that sonically where I'm like, this doesn't sound very good. So I'll put some kind of whoop, whoop, whoop.
When you got the call for this first project, this first TV show, did you immediately say, oh, for sure, I'm going to score this? Or were you thinking, I'm not a composer. How I'm not a TV composer. This is totally new to me. What were your thoughts when you got that call?
My phone's going off outside.
Oh, maybe there's another call. We've got a film coming.
It's that lady saying, you know what? I've rethought that whole internet thing.
Yeah.
No, I was wondering the same that Kenny asked. Did you know how to score the film? Did you sync it up?
No, I mean, the first time I did it, it was like, I didn't I didn't know how to do, I was like, I'll give this a go. Like, let's see how this works out. I just kind of threw myself into it, and I was just like, I don't really know what I'm doing. I'll just try it out. You know, I didn't even have a sampler. Actually, that mini disc player, I made a drum loop on that mini disc player, just making a pattern and then just looping it, because it has a loop function, those old mini disc players. And I did it. I was still at school, so I did my homework, and then I did a TV score, and I was like, that was fun. And then I got asked to do another one, and I got asked to do another one. And I think because I really cared about it, like for me, it was like I was just trying to make really good music. I wasn't really looking at like, oh, I'm just doing a job for a TV show. I was like, I'm trying to make a really good piece of music. That people responded to that, because I think there was a lot of people in TV at that time. And I still think this kind of exists in film and TV, where there's a bit of like what I call like client satisfaction, where it's like their only goal is to please the client. Is the client happy? Hooray. Whereas I'm like, nah, like obviously you want to keep people happy, but I'm like, I just want to make the best score it can be. So I'll have arguments with directors the whole time. They're like, I like this piece. And I'm like, yeah, but it's not good enough. We can make it better. I want to bin it and do something else. And I've had like big arguments with directors over things that they're happy with and I'm not.
It's interesting. It's often the opposite, which is the director says, the composer comes in with a great piece of music and the director says, oh, I don't know if that works. And then you're arguing, no, this really works, or let me work on it to show you.
Yeah, I mean, you have that all the time. I mean, like, I'm not always right. It's like, obviously, I like to think I'm always right, but you're not. Composer directors have different visions about what they want. I've got a thing at the moment where I'm on a film and we are going through like a gazillion versions of the opening, and it's like it's kind of insane. But I'm getting like the director's slightly changing what he wants, but I understand why he's making those calls, so I don't mind. I've never got a problem. Everyone's got a different vision for the story sometimes, and the director can have something. There might be something they're trying to say that they don't necessarily know how to express. So I'm always just like, what is going to make the film the best it can be, and what's going to make the experience the best for the audience? I'm always thinking really about the audience, and like when you go see a movie, is it going to be like really, really exciting, really engaging, really powerful? Like for me, it's always about thinking about seeing in the cinema or watching it on TV or whatever. And I just want to try and give those moments that I've had when I've seen things where you're like, whoa, that got me, or like that kind of stayed in here afterwards. And that involves quite a lot of pushing sometimes. I'm not, it's always been about trying to push it to do something that's great. And it makes the process difficult sometimes, because I know I can do things that people will be happy with, but I don't want to do them because I know they're really straightforward and, they're fine. I always use the burger metaphor, which is a really good metaphor, which is just everyone likes burger and chips. And most people like, what do you want to eat? Burger and chips. But I don't want to give them burger and chips. I want to give them something, like way more interesting and different. And they might go, wow, this is great. Or they might go, I just want burger and chips still. And in which case, okay, I'll make you a really good burger and chips. But it's trying to push things so the language of cinema and film music gets broader, because I think it could be such an amazing world. Like for a creative musician, it's like one of the greatest sandpits to play in. Like you can do so many different things, and I'm always amazed at how film music still is often only viewed through the lens of an orchestra. Like an orchestra gives something like prestige and credibility in like mainstream society, and everything else doesn't. We've still got this very weird way of looking at music that feels very like based on like sort of class and intellectualism. Whereas the great thing about doing music, like for film, is you can go from anything, and like me banging a water bottle up and down for like 2 minutes can be just as effective as, a 60-piece string section doing some kind of mad atonal movements, and absorbing yourself in that world and realizing and getting to stage, hopefully, where you realize that actually the water bottle is better than the orchestra, because you've heard the orchestra a million times do that. That's when it gets exciting. And that's when you can look at every element purely for its musical
that's great
power.
I think you've said 3 things in that last couple paragraphs that are absolute essential aspects of what you do. Number one, when you use the burger and chips analogy and how you go past it, you've just explained to me why unabashedly you are looking at a screen full of fans of Daniel Pemberton music because it does go so wonderfully into new territory. I mean, it's just the more we listen to your opus, it was kind of remarkable how many territories. We're going to get to that, but the variety of music, but also how it was kind of whatever variety we were in was just a step beyond. And so I just understood a little bit of it. That comes from your initiative. The other thing you said, which I really love, is that the sandpit is so wonderful. People rarely understand that, you know, they say, oh, you know, hey, this sounds like movie music. I always say, I don't have a clue what that means. Movie music can be a guy hitting on a bottle, or it can be an orchestra, or it can be Jerry Goldsmith playing frying pans and mixing bowls. There's no movie music analogy. Hey, Robert, do you still record with an orchestra, or do you use any synthesizers when you record? What? I don't know. Yes, both, neither. And seeing you do the feedback stuff was so cool. I want to ask you a question about something you said also. You said when people see a movie and when people go to the cinema, we're in a minute right now where that experience may be on the bubble a little bit. Does that change the way you think about recording or scoring if you think people are going to hear it sitting on their couch as opposed to being in a big room? Or do you trust that we will all go back to the movies in numbers?
I mean, I hope we go back to the movies because it's still, for me, like one of the greatest kind of art forms there is. And, you know, when you go and see, every time I see a really good movie, I remember where I was, where I saw it, what seat I sat in, talking about it on the way back from the cinema. And I think also that experience of hearing it. I've seen some of my films. There's a great cinema near me called the IMAX. There's an IMAX BFI, which is in the middle of this roundabout in Waterloo. And it's like one of Chris Nolan's favorite cinemas. And I always go and see a Chris Nolan movie there because it always sounds fucking insane. They got an amazing sound system. I've heard a few of my movies there, and I'm like, this is the only time I will ever experience my score heard like this. I remember seeing Man from U.N.C.L.E. there and going, shit, I'm hearing things I didn't even hear when we were mixing Abbey Road. And that experience is like, you know, is really special. And so I really hope it doesn't go away. I think we're definitely in a time of change, but I do think that, you know, cinema can be expensive, but if you see a great movie, it's a bargain of all time. Like it's only when you see like average movies that it's, you know, you might feel a bit cheated, but it's still like for what, 20 quid or however much it is, you can see some of the greatest works of art ever that have like the amount of time I invest in like just getting a hi-hat sound. Like if you came and see how I mix or record, I get so fiddly on all these different aspects that maybe no one's ever even going to hear.
Yeah. Or they may not know how you got there. They may just think it's a guy stepping on a pedal and clapping the hi-hat together, but you're making it out of an object.
Yeah, I mean, like, I've just done this film score, and there are so many different things in like textures, and I love layering things to get like slightly more unusual sort of feel to stuff. And you might even never notice that when you hear it, but I put that much detail into just the soundtrack, and you've got all the other departments doing that on everything from like buildings, costumes, lines, acting. And, you know, you're getting an amazing experience for the cinema. So I'm always like a big pro cinema guy. And it's weird. I've just done a movie called Enola Holmes, and that was meant to come out in the cinema. But it's now gone to Netflix because, you know, like the next, 6 months, if we go back to cinema, there's like a huge lineup of big beasts like Bond and Mulan and Fast and Furious. They're going to like pound our movie if it goes out to cinema. So then it wouldn't come out for a year and a half and all this kind of stuff. So they're sending it to Netflix, which for me is like it's a bit of a shame in the sense that we've done this like really big Atmos mix, and I've definitely written it in a way that was for cinema. But at the same time, loads more people are probably going to see it. Loads more people are going to experience it. So that's kind of cool. So you just got to take, you've always just got to adapt to what's around you. I mean, I'm always just like doing the work. So if people get to hear it and enjoy it, then that's like extra bonus.
I want to fast forward a little bit. So you got the call, you got into scoring some TV, and then your first kind of big movie on the scene, was that the Ridley Scott film? Or when did you sort of step into the theatrical cinema scene and
the Varsity
get away from TV?
So the first sort of proper movie I did that came out was called The Awakening, which was this like period ghost story by a really great British director called Nick Murphy. And I'd worked with him on a bunch of TV projects, and he very kindly took me into the film world, because often as soon as a director gets their first gig, they're like, whoa, see ya. And it's a really great film, really proud of the work we did on it. And the film came out, didn't really do a lot. Lots of people didn't see it. But then one person did, which was Ridley Scott. And Ridley loved it. He loved the music. And I got called in to a meeting with Ridley. I sort of knew his editor, Pietro Scalia, because I'd worked with him on a short film once. And so I got called in to meet Ridley, and we got on really well. I mean, I really love Ridley. He's like really awesome, down to earth, funny. He's got this kind of reputation that's quite scary, but if you actually get to know him, he's really funny. And you can argue with him, you can debate. He's a really good collaborator. And we talked about our careers and things. He was quizzing me about mine. I'd basically at that point done about 10, 15 years in TV. And like I said, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just making it up as I go along. And that sounds like sort of flippant, but it was kind of true. And I just learned every time I did a job, I would learn how to do something else. I'd do, let's go and do an orchestra. I don't know how to do that. So I'd work it out. And let's go do jazz band. Let's do this. And so I'd constantly do all these jobs and learn every time. And by not knowing what I was doing and just throwing myself in the deep end. And then he was like, you've done your 10,000 hours in the garage just doing that. That's how you've learned how to do film music. And he was like, I learned how to direct doing that in advertising, because he was like a phenomenal advertising director. And he's like, I learned everything I know through that period. So he's like, we kind of did the same thing. So I was like, that's a fucking cool story. I met Ridley Scott. I kind of thought that at the end of it, and I've got a nice little Ridley Scott anecdote. And then a week later, I get a phone call saying, right, he wants you to score the movie. Can you come over in like an hour? And I was asleep in bed. I was like, shit, really? Like, I was like half awake, and then I was like, oh, fuck. Oh, yeah, great. And then I basically had to cycle over to Soho incredibly fast.
You know what a great compliment it is that Ridley liked your music, because Ridley has superb taste in music and in composers. Of course, you're now entering a Hall of Fame with Hans and Harry, and
Vangelis. Yeah,
Vangelis. I'm not sure where Mark Streitenfeld fits in, but I also, I'm sure you had the experience of being in a mixing room with Ridley, or in a studio with Ridley, Abbey Road usually, and my experience was he'd sit quietly throughout a lot of the scoring, but if there was a problem, instead of getting hysterical he would just turn around to the composer and, Harry, I'm not sure that works, he'd say. I mean, it's funny you say he was scary. He was elegant whenever I worked with him.
I never found him scary. No, that's what you
same.
Had this rep. He's like a super nice guy to work with. I think with Ridley, it's like, if you're going to work with Ridley, you got to have your like 100% A game on. He's got no time for slackers.
Completely.
No time for excuses. It's not like, I can't do that because X, Y, and Z. You're just like, right, let's just do it. Like,
well, that experience took you to the A team.
Like when we're doing The Counselor, they were about to fly off to America, and they were going to retempt the opening. They were still fiddling with the opening. I'd written this piece, and they were like, yeah, we want to try something else. So they're about to put something else on. And I was like, if that goes on the beginning and they screen it in America and they like it, I'm kind of fucked, because it's going to...
It wasn't a piece of yours.
No, it was just a temp from another film. And I was like, this is going to like this will end up being a virus that affects the rest of the score in a way I don't want it to do, right? So I was like, look, we had a big chat about why the opening wasn't working. I was like, look, I think I know what you want. And we're having like lunch in a Soho cutting room, and he was flying off about 5 o'clock that evening or something. So I was like, look, we could just sit here and chat for ages, or I could cycle home and try and rewrite the opening in the next 2 hours. And he was like, yeah, okay. So I was like, okay, shit. So I basically like cycled through Soho back to my house, like kamikaze, like could have got killed, dodging out traffic, going, this is fucking crazy. I'm like trying to fight back. Weirdly, on that cycle ride, I saw Danny Boyle, which was very weird. Like years later, I ended up working with Danny, but I saw Danny Boyle outside this.
That's insane.
I was like, oh, look, there's Danny Boyle. I'm running back to Ridley's.
He didn't say, hey, man, do you have time to do yesterday after you finish this cue? So you get home.
I get home. I just go, right, let's rewrite this beginning. Boom, 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 as fast as I can. And did it in about 2 hours, sent it off to Pietro. They're like, this is great, cut it in. That went off on the plane. And that is pretty much what the beginning of the film now is with the titles. You know, it got changed a bit, but the ideas that were done in those 2 hours are like what ended up being the opening to the film.
Did you write any of that on the bike ride in your head? Were you like working stuff out?
Oh, I had some ideas in my head, but it's just that thing. Like, he's a guy who just likes people who do stuff, I think, and you know, you just got to go and do it and don't complain.
How crazy that you saw Danny Boyle, and just a couple years later, you're doing Steve Jobs with him.
Yeah.
How did you guys run into each other again?
Was it from the bike ride? He said, that guy who just rode past, I got to hire him someday.
I want that guy. I met him in the place he was standing outside, which is really odd if you think about it, because there's a club in Soho called the Union, which is a sort of members club. And he was standing, he's obviously a member, he was standing outside there, and that's why I met him. And even weirder, he wanted to meet me because he really liked the score to The Counselor. So
you like that first cue?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, maybe he did. So he really liked the score to The Counselor. And so I met him, we had a chat, and then we did Steve Jobs, and it was great. And, you know, that's been a nice relationship as well.
Again, Daniel, you're too modest, because you're naming two directors who have single-handedly chosen music for their pictures that are world-class composers. I mean, A.R. Rahman with Danny, of course, and Ridley with Hans. I mean, these directors understand music, and I can't say that about all directors. God bless them all. Some of them are better with picture or dialogue. Some really understand music, but not all of them. And you've been complimented to the moon by these two.
Yeah. And with Steve Jobs, the approach was really cool on that, because again, you could have just went to the orchestra, but because the film had roots in the 80s, you went around and looked for equipment. You created a score based on the time period. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came up with that idea and where you found the equipment?
Well, like, Aaron Sorkin wrote the script, and it was like really apparent. Like, it was very consciously done in 3 acts. Danny was shooting in 3 acts, 1 act at a time as well. And the DOP was shooting differently, different film stocks. So everything to me just said, right, everyone else is doing this, maybe I should do it too.
So they were using like old cameras, older style film, just to incorporate the look all around.
Yeah, so to like move between those 3 different time periods, they were approaching it differently in terms of, like, you know, staging, filming process. You know, the script was very clear. The way Aaron had written it, very clear, 3 acts. So I was like, I've got to do this on the music as well. So the idea always was trying to write it in 3 different ways. So the way I kind of broke it down, the idea was the birth of technology, which was like the launch of the Macintosh, was always going to be about the kind of brave new future that computers offered, and, you know, trying to get it period and of the time. And so the synthesizer felt like, you know, the idea of the synthesizer in the 80s was so exotic and exciting still. So I basically try to limit it to like nothing that didn't exist before 1984. Like, that's the way it had to be made. So I used lots of I used CS80, Mini Moogs, all kinds of gear that were pre-1984 synthesizers. And then the second act, which was Steve Jobs unveiling the NICT computer, because that was all shot in the San Francisco Opera House. It was very kind of ornate and sort of quite dramatic, and it felt like he's a big showman in that. A lot of this is about him being a showman and about those launches. So it felt like I needed to capture some of that drama in the music, and it made sense because of the surroundings to play into that and just kind of write an opera for the second.
Cool.
Act. And then the third act was kind of the idea of the Macintosh has become the computer he always wanted it to be in 84. But in 84, his dreams are bigger than the tech. And now, I just sitting there, the Mac, and I just remember thinking, well, I'll just write it all in the Mac, the kind of dream of what he had of trying to write this digital score, just using the stuff that was inside the, inside the Mac, because you can do that now and it doesn't sound rubbish. So that was the idea. And I like trying to create limitations for scores sometimes, because it means you really focus. Whereas if you go, hey, I could have anything here, it can become a bit of a mess.
It's just an incredible story, Daniel, to first of all acknowledge that the audience has no fucking clue the extent of the detail that you've just described for 3 acts of the Steve Jobs movie. They're watching a movie, they're watching the characters, they're watching the story unfold, not realizing that the composer has gone so deep into a creative realm. I think it's just wonderful and just it's a kind of advertisement for composers in its own way, and how hard they work and how unacknowledged that work is.
I mean, the thing is about that is I don't really want them to notice. I just want them to experience it, and it will change how they feel about the film. And the idea is always just you don't have to know how these things are done. You just have to feel it. And if you're in the audience, and I always joke I write music for the 1% of the 1% of people who actually care and notice film music. But but I'm always trying to I'm always kind of thinking basically about me. What would I think if I saw this movie? Would I be taiko drums and staccato strings? I'm out.
Daniel, I think one of the things that I really appreciate about every score I've heard is, and I now understand it talking to you, how regardless of the style, you do go deep. I mean, to listen to Spider-Verse next to Motherless Brooklyn.
Yeah.
It's if you closed your eyes and didn't know, that's 2 composers. That's 2 completely different composers. One's a kind of American jazzer who's really got this Miles Davis vibe, and maybe listen to Jerry Goldsmith's Chinatown, and the other is this kind of super hip hop maniac Tron.
It was brilliant.
Daft.
The Spider-Verse thing was so brilliant. Oh my God.
And I think Motherless Brooklyn is just unbelievably evocative. Do you worry that if you get into one particular genre that might not be your organic wheelhouse, that it might sound not up to your other scores, or do you just learn that wheelhouse?
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing that's difficult. The thing I'm always trying to do is trying to work out is, will the movie allow me to try something different? And so there are certain movies I sort of I wouldn't say turned down, but kind of decided not to turn up to the running track, so to speak. Yeah. Because I've just kind of thought, I know what this movie is going to be. People tell you, we want to make this sound like nothing else. We want it to be super original, blah, 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 blah. But you can tell quite early on, whether that's actually going to be the case or not. And so if it's a slightly cookie cutter approach, I try and stay away, if I can, from those movies. And I've always tried to work with people or projects where I kind of feel I can bring something of my individuality to it. And then the very nature, if they're allowing you to bring your individuality to it, then hopefully you can do something fresh, because you're not just trying to recycle a cue that another composer did who was ripping off another composer who's ripping off someone else through the sort of temp centipede. And
the temp centipede, that is good. Yeah. That's a band.
So you might not like. There's definitely certain genres like I'm more comfortable with. Like I find action sort of difficult. Like not I don't say difficult, but I find it difficult to do something original in action, and that's a lot down to filmmaking. Because if you're writing music that's very reactive to the picture, it ends up sounding very similar to a lot of other scores. So I was trying, like, you know, I did Birds of Prey recently, and
yes,
I came on board with that because I felt I could do something different with that world, and I felt it was a chance to do the kind of DC Comics world in a very different style. And we had a lot of discussions going through that about there were bits where they wanted me to try and do it like more conventionally action, and I was like, I don't want, like, why would we want to do that? Like, I've seen a million movies like that where it goes and someone gets punched, and you've seen those movies, you've heard them a million times. When I'm in the cinema and I watch those things, I'm like, oh, all right, let's get this fighting thing done with. And whereas when it's different, you're like super lean in. And so for me, it's always like, do you get a chance to do something different? And if you do, then you get inspired as a composer, because you get to do, you know, you get to work differently, and you get to try and make up the rules as you go rather than follow the rules that have been set. And, you know, film music's interesting sometimes because there are a lot of like unwritten rules that we all kind of abide by because they work. They're really successful. They give you the impact, emotional impact you want. They give you the physical impact sometimes. But when you can try and move away from those, but still get a similar emotional effect, that's when it's, like, for me, most effective. Because I always think, I have this line where I was like, there's no such thing as bad music. Like, there's literally no such thing as bad music. It's just about the context. So even the worst record you could ever think of, or the worst piece of music, if you had never heard a piece of music before and that's the first thing you heard, it would be amazing. And so it's like trying to have that mindset of like, how can you create things that like feel like experiences people haven't had? And I still think there's actually like huge scope. There's like tons of ideas I have, like, that I haven't even got around to doing yet. Like, I just want the right movie to come up, and I'm like, yeah, I want to do that movie.
That's actually, it's funny you say that, because we were thinking that about Spider-Verse and the way you took an orchestra and scratched it. First off, was that your first animated film?
Yeah, that was the first full-length one. And you're right, because that was an idea I'd had for like 20 years. From like, I used to go to these hip-hop clubs in London when I was a bit younger, kind of dressed the same though. I got really into turntablism, which was just people using the record turntables for scratching, but doing like really inventive stuff with it. So there'd be nights like there's a label called Ninja Tune and Mowax, and they were doing like very interesting experimental hip hop stuff. And they had like, you know, I just started seeing great DJs, people like DJ Shadow, DJ Food, the Psychonauts, all these kind of people. And that gave me an idea. I was like, you could use like turntables as an instrument. And I've always wanted a score where I felt I could do that. But that never really came up until Spider-Verse. And then Spider-Verse, I was like, I've got this idea that I've wanted to do for 20 years. And they were like, okay, cool, yeah, whatever. And it was like really complicated. Like, if I'd known how complicated and like time consuming and the amount of like R&D, so to speak, would have to go into doing it. Because early on, we were like trying to look at like, how do we scratch 7.1 Atmos files, okay? Which is unbelievably complicated. You think it's really straightforward. It's not. Because I was like, we're going to record an orchestra, we're going to record the 5.1 or 7.1. So that's going to be like 7 different like audio sources, and I want the same scratch applied to all of those. And I ended up chatting to Serato, who are like the big
DJ like, software, yeah,
who like create this really amazing software that allows you to do that. And we spoke to a lot of people, and it was just like, this is going to be so unbelievably complicated that don't bother. So we ended up doing a stereo, and it was fine. But the process of getting to that, we did experiments, and it was for something you'd think shouldn't be that complicated, it was really complicated.
Well, lucky for you, the movie won a Golden Globe and the Oscar.
Yeah, it won the Oscar. It basically won every single award except one for music.
And now you get to do it all over again.
Yeah, I have, right. So we're about to do this massive clap all over London for like the NHS and all the care workers who obviously are doing an amazing job while are slightly less.
Do you hear it in your crib?
It's gonna kick off in a tick. So I can see everyone's being out the windows. So if I open the window, hang on, back in the tick.
We're about to hear all of London clapping for their health workers.
Is he gonna? He might sample this.
Stand by.
He's got instruments.
And Daniel's going to contribute.
All right, I think now's a good time to take a break while Daniel is thanking the healthcare workers of London.
I hear people whistling in the background.
We will pause. Stick around, much more with Daniel Pemberton when we return.
Hey there, fans of Score the Podcast. I'm David W. Collins, creator and host of The Soundtrack Show for iHeartRadio. Like you, I love Score the Podcast. And The Soundtrack Show is the perfect complement if you're passionate about music for film, TV, even video games and theater. Each week, I do a deep dive into some of the greatest scores of all time, as well as some fan favorites, and talk about why the music moves us from a character and story point of view. We also learn fascinating behind-the-scenes stories and share the history and background that brought each piece of music to life. It doesn't matter if you're a musician or not. Music is a language that we all understand. And through our love of movies like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Back to the Future, or even classics like Casablanca or Psycho, we can gain a deeper appreciation for how composers are speaking to us through music, explaining why we have such a powerful reaction to the images on screen. The Soundtrack Show is available on Apple Podcasts, the iHeartRadio app, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, this is Bear McCreary. You're listening to Score the Podcast. Now back to the show.
Welcome back to Score the Podcast, presented by Spitfire Audio. We're chatting with the amazing and inventive composer Daniel Pemberton, who is outside his window right now clapping for the healthcare workers of London. Daniel, you still with us?
I've got coal as well somewhere.
It's like Daniel Pemberton is living inside like a toy box.
Yeah.
Just everywhere around him, he's always grabbing for something.
I think you could add your applause, Kenny. Let's Score the Podcast, saluting the workers of London.
Can you? I don't know if you can hear out the window.
Yeah, we hear.
Right. I better shut the window. Hang on.
That is very wonderful that you do that and that London does that. It's great.
Yeah, because obviously there's loads of people who have been for years underpaid and treated terribly by our government. And now they've suddenly realized they're really important. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's interesting. Why didn't you realize that 10 years ago?
Yeah, they're the heroes.
Regarding Spider-Verse, so the film went on to win all these awards, and you're set up for Spider-Verse 2. Are you going to be taking that same approach with the scratches to keep that sound, or was that you going to try and switch it up? I'm curious if you keep the vibe there.
I mean, Spider-Verse 2, technically I'm not on yet. So it's like, it's not, not an
That's
official,
a news break.
It's not
I can't imagine they would even think twice.
No, like, let's say there's things going on behind the scenes. But, like, look, we've already been talking about it. The thing about Spider-Verse is everyone involved with that movie, like, we all cared about it so much. It's one of the most sort of amazing movie experiences I've had, where I felt everyone on that knew they were doing something different. And I remember working on it and everyone being like, what are you working on? I'd be like, oh, I'm working on this Spider-Man movie. And they'd be like, oh, Spider-Man, all right. Like, another one. And then you'd be like, oh, it's an animated one. And they'd be like, oh. Like, their enthusiasm just... And even when it came out, it was kind of interesting. People were a bit like, well, I don't see an animated Spider-Man movie. And then I'm like, you should see it. It's amazing. And then over time, it's been amazing how all these people who've sort of slightly dismissed it at the time have been like, fuck, that movie is amazing.
Groundbreaking.
Yeah. I remember a friend of mine asked me to go, and I said, an animated Spider? I looked up nothing about the movie. I didn't know anything about it. Went in cold. and it had the Spider-Man humor, like it had that sort of feel to it, but it was also so original. And I remember noticing that the animation was completely different than anything I had ever seen. And I'm curious, because I know it took a really long time for them to do that. How early on were you brought onto the project, and were you scoring as they were changing stuff, or did you get like a finished cut?
That film only got finished, I think, a week before the premiere.
Wow.
Or before the release. They fiddle with that right to the end. Like Phil and Chris like want to keep pushing it and making it like better and better and better. It was crazy. But yes, I never got a finished cut on that. I would just be working alongside everyone. That was like the maddest, all hands on deck. Let's just get this. I was working in LA for that. I was living this weird parallel life to all of society, where my life was stuck in a cupboard at Sony trying to finish this film. And I would get up, I'd go for a run from my hotel. I'd get in a car. I'd be at Sony. I'd be there till like 1 or 2 in the morning. I'd leave. I'd be the only person on the entire lot. I would go home, and that would happen every day. And it was super great. There was so much to do. And I don't have like a massive team of people churning out other cues. I'm doing everything. So it's a lot of work, but it's with that film, we all so believed in it. And I think because we were slightly under the radar, in the same way that people were like, oh yeah, Spider-Man animated, I don't really care. It meant that we were left alone to make something special. If that was like the big Marvel Spider-Man movie, there was no way I would have got to do that score, I would have thought. I mean, I might have done, but I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have done. And that was what was so exciting, because we were just like, everyone's pushing the boundaries all the time. All the animators, all the designers, art department. So we were like, I got to do that too. I got to keep up with everyone else, because they are doing such an amazing job on that film of making everything unique. And so, like, aside from the story and everything that the film stands for, like, just from an artistic, like, point of view, it was like so exciting to work on. And with the sequel, obviously I'm not really going to talk anything about it, but all I'll say is I was worried that they might just be like, hey, we've made a successful animated Spider-Man movie. We're just going to churn out some wisecracking Spider-Man, and it will still make money, but who cares? No, like what they want to do with the sequel is like fucking amazing. And it's going to be like Spider-Verse is the warm-up. Spider-Verse 1 is the warm-up.
Wow.
So I'm super conscious of trying to make it like as exciting and groundbreaking and unexpected as possible.
As the filmmakers.
So what you're telling us right now is you're not on the film, but you're working on ideas for the film you're not on.
All I'm saying is I'm not officially on the film.
I think we can leave it at that. We can keep the fans on edge. I want to ask a question just out of curiosity. When was the first time you heard the Post Malone hit from the film? During the film? After the film? In a pub somewhere? Somebody said, oh, here's the song from Spider-Man?
In an office. Spring, who's the music
Spring Aspers.
Yeah.
Lovely.
She brought it in on a little like speaker, like a kind of portable boombox, because no one was allowed to actually have it. We weren't even allowed to have it for the movie, I think, for quite a while. We could only hear it by Spring playing it in the office. So the first time I heard it was in my little cupboard in Sony that was about this, like, I thought, hey, I'm going off to Hollywood to make a movie. Oh, I'm stuck in an office, like a tiny deserted floor at Sony in a small office room. And yeah, she came in and we all heard it. I mean, it's a great track. It's really interesting arrangement, and it's nuts how big that song has become.
Yeah.
Did that help? Does that help you when there's a big single like that, or do people think Post Malone scored the movie? I'm curious if there's like confusion when you have a huge hit like that.
I think most people have no idea there's like score in most movies. Like, if I'm being really honest, people remember pop songs, they don't remember anything else. And like, I think what you want to do, like, I think the thing that's sometimes tricky for me is like when the sort of the most valuable bits of real estate in a movie get given over to songs. And I don't mind it when those songs are, bringing something to the film. But if they're just there for marketing, it's very frustrating. And also, if you are, as a composer, trying to build a language through the film to like pay off in key moments, which I'm always trying to do. I'm always trying to like seed ideas. So when they come, they mean something and they connect. Sometimes songs, like, on loads of movies can play havoc with those kind of bits of architecture. Like you're trying to build a very elegant building and they're like, hey, we want to put a subway like on the 14th floor. And you're like, man, it's going to kind of ruin but they're like, hey, everyone likes Subway. I mean, do they? But,
yeah.
And Subway will do some advertising for the building. And that's great. And I'm like, okay. But like Spider-Verse, my favorite bit is in terms of working together is the What's Up Danger track, which was working with that track and building the score. So the score you've heard all the way through, the sort of ba ba ba, which I'd play on something if I'm not having Logic, I'm not doing that. I'll just go and play on the piano in 2 seconds.
Let's do it.
So they're kind of obviously you can't see me, but you might be able to hear this. So you've got the kind of Miles's theme. So
yeah,
that kind of theme you've been hearing all the way through the film.
Right.
The whole idea is you're getting chords here, you're getting the theme here, you're getting bits, you're getting the bass line here, and then it all comes together when he finally becomes Spider-Man. And then at the very end, when, the end of the film, all those other bits all come together. And I always like that idea of trying to have all these different elements of a film mean something. And, they tie together. Like when we see who the Prowler is, that whole idea in that film, for me, I was massively influenced by Once Upon a Time in the West, the Morricone score.
Yeah.
I remember seeing that in the cinema. I saw it at the National Film Theatre, or the BFI now. And that film is long, man. It's like a 3.5 hour film or something. And I always think it's an amazing Western, but you take the music out of it, I'd be like, is it as amazing as everyone says it is? But when that track kicks in, you're like, holy shit, that's the thing, the man with the harmonica that I've been hearing all the way through. And you realize why you've been hearing it. And that thing where it pulls back, boom, and it just gets you in the heart of fuck, this is why you've been hearing this tune. And it pays off. It's one of the best cinema moments I've ever had. And I was like, I want to do that. Spider-Verse, I want to have this tool that you're hearing that's this noise that scares you. You don't know what it is. It's abstract. And then there's going to be a moment when it ties up with a melodic and musical idea and it fucking punches you really hard in the heart, because what's being revealed as well is very painful. And that was a super conscious decision to build this idea so that at that moment, which is the peak moment for that piece, you've built an apparatus around. So I was always about protecting that moment. The amount of emails, and arguments I'd have about I got my please turn the music up cards that you can play as a composer. And if you play them all the time, everyone's like, man, your cards are worthless. So that was the one I was like, I am playing this card. I'm putting all my money on this moment.
I've got to share this story with you because last year, I think it was July 5th, the weekend of July 4th, the holiday weekend, LA had 2 pretty large earthquakes. And yesterday was in theaters. And coincidentally, Robert and I in different locations were watching yesterday when a 7-point-something earthquake hit.
7.1,
so
I think, to keep it
we
consistent.
weren't sure if the Beatles existed after we watched the movie because there was this massive earthquake. First off, it's quite an undertaking to write a film based on the Beatles. I can't even imagine what the hoops they had to jump through to do that film. But coming on as the composer, was that nerve-wracking for you to write music alongside the Beatles?
I mean, that job was insane because I was doing everything musical on that film, which is the mad, Danny got me in and he was like, right, really early on. He was like, I'm doing this film. He explained to me. I was like, this film sounds great, but like, what am I going to do? Like, you've got these Beatles songs. Great. I love the Beatles, but I'm a film composer. And he's like, no, I want someone to take the, this actor I want to use. I want you to work with him. And like, I want you to turn him into like a pop star and like work to make him become the character in the film. And I was like, okay, great. But like, that is not what I do at all. Like, and I actually like really broke down everything I'm good at and everything I'm bad at to Danny. I'm like, I can do this well. People think I do this well. I can't really do this that well, but don't tell anyone. This I cannot do, right? I can't. And so I spent a long time trying to convince Danny that I was the wrong person for the job, which is kind of a terrible thing to do, Danny, because he goes, this is exactly why I want you, because you'll look at it differently. You will approach this film in a way. I don't want someone who's like slick, rather trained, or like someone who's like, I want someone who's going to look at this whole thing differently. So I was like, okay, look, I like literally cannot like do this. So I said, I want to bring a friend of mine in who's a guy called Ardem Ilhan, who's a great composer as well. He just did Avenue 5 for Armando Nucci, which is on HBO. He's like a super old friend of mine, and we've always talked about trying to do something together. So I was like, look, do this with me, because he's done like performing live. I can't sing, I'm terrible. I can't perform, like my rhythm's rubbish. So we worked together early on at just working with Himesh Patel, who plays Jack. And we did so much like insane behind the scenes stuff. We got a band together for him. I mean, we did everything from like going around guitar shops to help him find his guitar, like which guitar you feel most comfortable with, to like getting a band for him, all this stuff you don't see anywhere in the movie, that was all just behind the scenes work to like get him into the role of the character and get him like confident.
Yeah. Well, as Robert always points out, when musicians are playing on screen, it's very obvious if they're not comfortable or used to looking like they play in a band or are performing.
The thing is, Danny also didn't want to do any pre-records anywhere. He wanted it all to be live. And I was like, this is very, very, very bad idea. Danny's like, no, it's exactly what I want. This is what we're doing. So I'm like, okay. And Himesh, I got to say, was like phenomenal. He worked so hard.
Was he musical to begin with, or was he a guitar player?
He'd done a bit. He'd done some guitar and piano, but like not really. It wasn't, like Danny took a really big chance in like for someone who is like the center of the whole film. And that's what's so great about Danny, is he'll just be like, right, I feel this, let's just do it. And like, it could have really gone wrong, but it didn't. And, we did stuff like, one of my favorite things is we had to rehearse in this big building and boring building. And I was like, this is a really terrible place to like play music in every day. So we got the art department to turn his little rehearsal room into Jack's bedroom. So we got a bed in there. We got hi-fi, piano. We put posters all over the wall. It was really cool. It was a really nice place to hang out. So we'd hang out there, me, Ardem, and Himesh, and we'd work through the songs. We had to write Himesh's bad songs, which was really good fun. Like Summer Song, Rock This Road. We had to like work on all the live performances, work on the setups, work on like how we were going to help stage those, rehearse them, everything from what kind of color guitar. It was nuts. It was like, and then at the same time, I also had to score the movie, which was kind of insane, because it was like, you've got to do something that feels like in the world of the Beatles, but isn't the Beatles.
You did. So, Quarterly, there's a lot of, it's almost like George Martin arrangements without the vocals sometimes. I listen to it and it's sort of, this could be a Beatles song with just the strings from the Beatles song. There's something Quarterly that's very Beatlesque, and you nailed it.
Yeah, like try to approach it. Like I have a really great mixer, this guy called Sam McKell, who I've worked with ever since Man from U.N.C.L.E. And he also, weirdly, his two main people he works with are me and the Beatles, which is super mad. So he does all the Beatles, like he's doing Abbey Road at the moment, and he does all the sort of reissues, like the remixes and the Atmos stuff. And he's like super deep in Beatles world. He's like one of the only guys the Beatles would trust. It's like him and Charles Martin work together. So I had someone on my team who knew everything about everything to do with the Beatles. So I was like, let's try and approach this as if like the Beatles are scoring this movie. Like what would their techniques and how would they work? Like that's what I try. I tried to not make it like his Beatles pastiche music. It was like, let's think, how would they score it? How would they record the drums? How would they like jam? And so I try to work that way. But there's also like one of my favorite things about that whole movie is like a nerdy fact is that having worked with Danny before, I know that Danny loves lo-fi and punk and anything that is not. He doesn't like slick Hollywood. Basically, he likes the complete opposite. So very early on, I had this idea of trying to write the whole score on like voice memos on iTunes, which was one of my crazy ideas of like trying to do on my iPhone all on voice memos, because I was like saying this guy's a singer-songwriter. So, a lot of singer-songwriters jot their ideas down on voice memos, and it's got a really kind of crappy but like really interesting sound to it. So early on, my first genius idea, there's inverted commas for people on the audio there, big inverted commas, was to try and do the whole score on my iPhone voice memos. Now, very quickly, I realized this wasn't a genius idea at all. It was a pretty rubbish one. But the moment when he goes to see a certain fisherman, I don't want to give the film away, after he does help, he drives to the Dorset countryside to go see this fisherman, and there's a piece of guitar music. That music was recorded on this iPhone, which obviously on the audio you can't see, but I'm just going to show you how fucked up it is.
It's
literally held together with sellotape, and I recorded it.
It looks like the Spider-Verse edition. It's all cracked. The screen looks like a spider web.
Yeah, I recorded it on this this very phone on voice memos, and that is what you hear in the film. Like you don't hear it like it hasn't been re-recorded or like fancied up at Abbey Road. It's off that voice memos, and that's one of the things I'm like most proud of, was that I managed to get in a massive Hollywood Universal movie 2 to 3 minutes of film score that was recorded on my phone in my flat.
The music executive at Universal is going to hear this and call you and say, did we pay for that cue that you did on an iPhone? Because we had Abbey Road booked that day.
But that's one of the things that's great. The Beatles approach was experimental, and it was, they're a great band to have that world to work within, say Revolution number 7, Revolution number 9, like very experimental. So even things like Radio Static and old recordings, trying to incorporate those kind of ideas into the score. Like I kind of want to get the soundtrack out, the score out. I've just been so busy, and there was like sort of weird.
There's no score album from yesterday?
There should be at some point. I've just we couldn't do it at the time because I then had to, after I did that, I then had to go and record and produce the entire concept album, all through that process as well. I was like, we should be doing an album with this, and everyone was like, no, we don't need to do that, which I found a bit weird. And then at the end, they were like, oh shit, we need an album, so that was like a whole other project of try and make what is billed in the movie as the greatest album of all time.
Was Paul McCartney involved in any of the music work in the film? Aside from obviously the songs.
No, the Beatles are involved in terms of they gave permission. They're very much aware of the project. Apple were kind of involved, but it was not, they were not involved with the process of making the movie.
Not like Bohemian Rhapsody, the way Queen was.
No, this is very different. Yeah, this is very different to that. And Rocket Man, it was this is like a tale with the Beatles at the core rather than the Beatles story.
Interesting.
But yeah,
beautiful.
Doing that album was insane as well, because that was a different project to just scoring the movie. So that movie, I had to score the movie. I had to do all the music production. Had to do all the kind of weird live on set acty stuff, and then I had to make this album at the end.
Well, we hope that album gets released at some point.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Well, the score album will come out. The kind of commercial album is out, and it didn't I thought it was going to sell a gazillion copies, and it hasn't. So my second half Hawaii is still sadly sad. But I'm very proud of the album, and please give the album a listen in order, because I spent ages on the ordering. I always spend ages on the ordering. I don't think anyone cares.
Well, I think one of the takeaways from today is that your attention to detail is second to none.
Yeah.
Now I know for everything that you do going forward, and of course I'm going to expect it from what I've listened to, but I'm just excited by the level of creativity, Daniel. I just think it's really, truly makes film composers shine in a way, just to understand that you're thinking that hard about the sounds you make and the way it's done. And I can't say that every film composer does it to your level.
Even if it's only for the 1%. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to believe that they are sampling bottles with funny pencils and turning that into magnificent Academy Award-winning scores. We feel lucky just to get you during this little crisis, to get you on our show. So I appreciate the fact that you came on today. And I know for all our listeners, see, that's your crowd outside, the London crowd, saying we want to thank all health workers and Daniel Pemberton.
One is slightly less important than the other there.
Daniel, thanks again for coming on the show. A reminder to our listeners, subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts. You can follow us. There's a number of ways. Instagram, Score Movie, Twitter, @ScoreThePodcast, Facebook, Score a Film Music Documentary, and send us your questions, score the mailbox at epicclef.com.
Composer Carol, thank you so much. And Daniel, be safe.
You too.
And we'll see you next time.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Score listeners, we're so grateful for the support of Spitfire Audio. They collaborate with people like Hans Zimmer and the Bernard Herrmann Estate to build sample libraries that elevate your music. You're about to hear a musical demo from the Olafur Arnold's Stratus package to hear what some of the different sounds sound like.
As an exclusive to Score listeners, Spitfire is offering 20% off your first order. That's good for over 50 of their libraries. I'd check it out because it's exclusive to our listeners of Score, the podcast.
Yeah, just go to spitfireaudio.com, enter the promo code SCORE2020 so they know we sent you, and check out this cue from the Olafur Arnold's Stratus package. Again, go to spitfireaudio.com. Use the promo code SCORE2020 to save 20% off your first order. We will see you next week here on Score the Podcast.